Timmy and Tina, their teacher, said, "What are you two up to now?" "Three," Timmy said. "Three," their teacher asked. "Three," Tina said. "Three what?" the teacher asked. "There's not two of us," Timmy said. "There's three of us," Tina said. "We're triplets," they said together. Because of Timmy and Tina, their teacher had often cried in the classroom. She'd also cried during her drive home and her drive to school. And she'd cried when she woke and realized that she had to drive to school. And she cried before she'd fallen asleep at night when she realized she'd have to wake and go to school again. That's a lot of crying. That's a lot of tears. 10 million tears to be exact. The teacher had counted them. Their teacher's lips trembled. Her hands shook. Her heart was a radio blasting rock and roll at maximum volume. But she wasn't going to cry this time. No way. She would not let these strange kids make her weep in public ever again. So she calmly walked up to the chalkboard and wrote the three hardest math problems she could think of. They were geometry questions about squares and triangles and circles in 3 dimensions, and a number that started out at 3.14, but kept going and going and going like an endless snake. These kids were only 10 years old. She'd never taught them a thing about geometry, not really, and certainly not about any math this complicated. "Okay," the teacher said, "I would like 3 volunteers to come up and solve these problems." All the kids, even Tina and Timmy, froze. They knew they couldn't solve those problems. They couldn't figure out why their teacher expected them to know the answers. Timmy and Tina, their teacher said, "Would you and your sister please come up and work the board?" Timmy and Tina groaned. They didn't want to do it. They were mad. But their sister was even angrier. "Empty dresses hate geometry." Timmy and Tina looked at each other. They read each other's minds. They knew what to do. So they walked up to the chalkboard. Tina held a piece of chalk in her left hand and another piece in her right hand, which also held the empty dress left sleeve. Timmy held a piece of chalk in his right hand and another piece in his left hand, which also held the empty dress's right sleeve. 2 kids in an empty dress, triplets, with 4 pieces of chalk, and all 4 of them wrote the same thing in big block letters. "This is not fair." And it wasn't fair. Not at all. Timmy and Tina and Mary Elizabeth St. Pierre weren't bad kids, were they? No, they were rebels. They were fighting against an evil teacher. "This is not fair," Tina shouted. "This is not fair," Timmy shouted. They shook the empty dress as if she were dancing, as if she were leading a parade. "This is not fair. This is not fair. This is not fair." With the empty dress leading them, Timmy and Tina and the other kids marched out of the classroom. But because they were only 10 years old, most of the kids stopped marching at the school doors, but Timmy and Tina kept marching and chanting and marching and chanting. They marched and chanted their way along the highway and out of town, down the dirt path, past a red barn, and to the shore of Lake Green, with Mary Elizabeth St. Pierre swinging between them. Timmy and Tina danced in the sand. It was a strange dance, of course. They jumped high in the air. They clapped their hands and clicked their heels. They made the sand angels. They spun in circles and spat like sprinklers. They howled like wolves at the bright sun and the moon barely visible on the horizon. "We are magic," Timmy shouted. We are magicians, Tina shouted. We can make anything come true, they shouted together. And then a strong and clever wind ripped Mary Elizabeth St. Pierre out of the hands and sent her drifting 10, 20, 30 feet over and into the water, where she floated like a dress-shaped boat. Timmy and Tina silently stared at the blue and yellow dress floating on the black water. It floated away from them. Don't you hate it when she does that? Tina asked. Yeah, she thinks she's much better than us, Timmy said. Hey, Tina shouted at the dress. You're so stuck up. I hate you. So, our sister, he said. You shouldn't say that. But I do hate her, she said. She's always gets more attention than we do. Yeah, you're right, he said. The dress kept floating away from them. It was going to float out of the lake and down a river, into and across the ocean, and discover a new country. That dress was going to have adventures that Timmy and Tina would never be able to share. Timmy and Tina were so jealous of their sister. They were furious with her. Throw a rock at her, Tina said. What? Timmy asked. Hit her with a rock, she said, and sink her. So Timmy found a flat rock and skipped it once, twice, 3 times across the water and tore a hole in the dress. Good shot, Tina shouted. They watched the dress sink beneath the surface of the lake. Good, Timmy said. She's gone. But then the dress popped back up to the surface. No, Timmy screamed. Throw another rock at her, Tina screamed. So Timmy found a bigger, flatter rock and skipped it once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times and tore a bigger hole in the dress. Yes, Tina shouted. I got it that time, Timmy shouted. They watched the dress sink again beneath the surface of the lake. It's not coming back this time, Tina said. No way, Timmy said. But sure enough, the dress popped up to the surface again. It almost seemed to float above the water. Timmy, Tina said, I want you to kill that dress. So Timmy found the best skipping rock anybody had ever found, and he skipped it 12 times and tore a fatal hole in the dress. Or so he thought. The dress didn't sink at all this time. In fact, it was now definitely floating above the surface of the lake. That dress was hovering above the water. Timmy and Tina gasped in fear once, and then gasped again when the best skipping scone in the world came flying back to them, bounced off Timmy's chest, and landed on the beach at his feet. Did that dress just throw that rock back at us? Tina asked. Back at me, Timmy said. And then both kids screamed when that empty dress, when Mary Elizabeth St. Pierre straightened her sleeves and hem and came floating back toward them. Stop her, Tina yelled. She's going to get us. Timmy picked up the rock at his feet. He ignored Tina's panicked screams and took careful aim at their fast approaching triplet. He knew they were in terrible danger if he missed. He threw with all his might, but the third stone came skipping back. And that ends the story. And we're reading from, it's called the Chronicles of Harris Burdick. And yeah, the short story is that there's a bunch of stories in this book, and a person came to visit this other person with some pictures, and they promised that with each picture that he brought today, that he would bring tomorrow the stories that went with the pictures. Well, he never came back the following day, and he never brought the stories back to anyone that went with these pictures. So all of these writers got together, or was it one writer, Chris Van Allsburg, Allsburg, with an introduction by Lemony Snicket. 14 amazing authors tell the tales, the Chronicles of Harris Burdick. And I've just really enjoyed this book, and I hope that someone enjoys this story out there. And thanks for listening, and have a great day. Thanks.